Saraphene Ash, a humble servant healer in the kingdom of Draventhornne, is falsely accused of being a witch after calming an injured dragon Hatchling and is sentenced to feed the legendary blind dragon a fate meant to kill her. Instead of attacking, the ancient dragon recognizes her as Saraphene Orel, the last surviving descendant of the long-erased Dragon Seer bloodline, and reveals that its blindness was deliberately inflicted by the powerful Red Council to silence its testimony about their crimes. Through her unique ability to hear pain and witness memories, Saraphene uncovers a century-old conspiracy in which Counselor Melon and the Council blinded the dragon. Azerion murdered her mother, Eloan Orel erased the Seer bloodline, manipulated dragon memories, and built the kingdom's entire dragon bond system on stolen sight and false obedience. Dragon King Lucien Ver, initially unaware of the truth, discovers that his royal bond cuff and authority were founded on these lies and chooses to abandon the stolen power rather than preserve the corruption. Together, Saraphene Lucien and the freed dragon Azerion expose the conspiracy, shatter the magical systems controlling dragons, reveal hidden records of the Council's crimes, and restore dragons' right to choose their own bonds. During a public reckoning, Lucien dissolves, the Red Council accepts responsibility for ruling through a corrupted system, and commits to rebuilding the kingdom on truth rather than control, while Saraphene refuses to become a new ruler over dragons, choosing instead to serve as a witness who protects free choice. In the end, Melon is defeated, the names of forgotten victims are restored, the feeding pit is opened, and its dead honored dragons regain their freedom, and Saraphene emerges as the last Dragon Seer, carrying her mother's legacy while beginning a cautious but hopeful future alongside Lucien in a kingdom finally learning to live without chains. The blind dragon opened its eyes for the girl they had sent to die. For 100 years, no one in the kingdom of Draventhornne had seen the beast look at anything. Its eyes had been sealed beneath white scar tissue thick as pearl and old as punishment. It lived below the eastern tower in a cavern of black iron chained by 7 dragon bone anchors and fed by criminals, oathbreakers, and servants. The court wished to forget. The official record called it mercy. The dragon was too old to fly, too dangerous to free, too sacred to kill. The servants called it the pit that ate names. Tonight, they sent Saraphene Ash there with a silver bowl of raw heart meat and a death sentence disguised as obedience. She stood at the mouth of the cavern, barefoot, dressed in the same smoke-gray servant gown she had worn when the guards dragged her from the lower apothecary. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid. Ash and herb dust marked her fingers. A thin cut bled at her lip where Counselor Melon's ring had struck her for answering too quietly. Behind her, 2 tower guards held spears tipped with dragon glass, but they did not step past the first threshold. No one did. The air below smelled of iron, old smoke, wet stone, and something ancient trying not to die. From deep inside the cavern came the drag of chains. One slow sound, then another. Saraphene tightened both hands around the bowl. Counselor Melon stood behind her in black court robes embroidered with red flame thread, his long white hair tied at the nape, his face elegant with the kind of cruelty that never needed to hurry. "Walk forward," he said. Saraphene did not move. The guards shifted. Melon sighed softly, as if her fear bored him. "A witch who can whisper to wounds should not tremble before a blind beast." "I am not a witch," Saraphene said. Nylon's mouth curved. "That is what all witches say before something answers them." The words scraped through her. She had spent 22 years not answering when people called her strange. She was a servant healer in the lower halls, allowed to grind herbs, wrap, burns, wash blood from noble slaves, and keep dying things quiet until someone important decided whether they were worth saving. She had never cast a spell, she had never called fire, she had only done what her mother taught her before vanishing into a winter raid. Listen before touching a wound, because pain speaks before flesh does. That was the mistake. 3 nights ago, a young dragon hatchling belonging to Lord Varric had been brought into the lower apothecary with a cracked wing and a fever burning blue under its scales. The royal dragon healers had failed to quiet it. Saraphene had touched the break with trembling hands and whispered the old lullaby her mother used to sing over injured birds. The hatchling stopped screaming, then it bowed its head to her. By morning, Melon's spies had named her secret witch. By dusk, the council had accused her of forbidden Dragon Seer blood. By midnight, the Dragon King himself had ordered punishment. Also, Munn said Saraphene had not seen King Lucien Ver when the order was spoken. She had only seen the black seal on the parchment the dragon crown pressed into wax and Melon's satisfied eyes as he read the sentence aloud before the servants. The accused will feed the blind dragon at moonrise. If she survives, the court will reconsider her guilt. No servant survived the blind dragon. That was the point. The chains moved again. A low breath rolled through the cavern, hot enough to stir Saraphene's hair. Melon leaned closer. "Go on, girl. If your blood is innocent, the beast will simply eat." Saraphene looked back once. Beyond the gods, high above the pit steps, figures watched from a balcony cut into the cavern wall, counselors in black, dragon priests in red masks, noble dragon binders with jeweled collars at their throats. And among them, half hidden in shadow, stood the Dragon King. Lucien Ver did not sit. Kings did not need to sit when fear made room for them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and darkly regal, wearing black armor scaled with dull gold at the edges. A long black mantle fell from his shoulders. His hair was black and slightly unbound from the storm outside. His face was severe, almost beautiful in a dangerous way, with a sharp jaw and eyes the color of molten amber held behind ice. Around his left wrist coiled a golden dragon bond cuff, the ancient sign of his right to rule. Saraphene had seen him only twice before, always from far below stairs. Tonight he looked at her as if trying to decide whether she was a threat or an answer he did not want. She hated him for standing there. She hated him more because some part of her had wanted him to stop this. Melon's voice cut into her thoughts. "Feed the dragon." Saraphene stepped into the cavern. The first chain stretched from the wall into darkness, then the second, then the third. Each link was larger than her body, carved with old binding runes that glowed faintly red. The floor was slick with water and old ash. Bones lay scattered near the edges, most animal, some not. She forced herself not to look too long. A shape moved ahead. The blind dragon emerged from shadow. It was enormous, even chained, even crouched low beneath the cavern ceiling. It made the world feel smaller. Its scales were not black, as Saraphene expected, but deep iron-gray stree with dull silver scarred by age and old wounds. Its wings were folded tight against its sides, shredded in places. Its horns curved back like broken moonlades. Across its sealed eyes ran thick white scars crossing from brow to jaw, cruel and deliberate. Not blindness from age, blindness from violence. Saraphene stopped breathing. The dragon lowered its massive head toward the bowl. The court above leaned forward. The beast sniffed the meat. Then it turned its blind face toward Saraphene, not toward the bowl. Toward her, a sound moved through its chest. Not a growl, a question. Saraphene's fingers tightened around the silver bowl. "I brought food," she whispered, though she did not know why she spoke to it like a patient. The dragon did not open its mouth. Instead, it shifted closer, dragging 7 chains until the anchors screamed against stone. The guards at the entrance cursed and stepped back. Saraphene should have run. Every story said the blind dragon struck by scent, by heat, by heartbeat. But as it lowered its snout near her, she saw the wound beneath one scarred eye, infected, swollen, still weeping after all these years. Her healer's mind betrayed her fear. "They never treated this," she whispered. The dragon went still. On the balcony, Melon's voice sharpened. "Do not touch it." Saraphene looked up. The Dragon King had moved to the railing. His amber eyes were fixed on her hand. For the first time, fear crossed Melon's face. That was when Saraphene understood. They had not sent her here only to die. They had sent her here because they were afraid of what would happen if she lived. The dragon breathed against her palm. Pain spoke from the wound before flesh did. Not words. Memory. A flash of white fire. A court chamber. Dragon glass blades. A woman screaming. A child hidden beneath blood-red silk. The blind dragon, roaring as men in council robes, burned its eyes so it could never testify to what it had seen. Saraphene staggered. The silver bowl fell from her hands and struck the stone above. The court erupted. Melon shouted, "See her." But the dragon moved first. Its chained head lowered between Saraphene and the guards protecting her. Saraphene lifted her trembling hand and pressed her palm to its wounded snout. The cavern fell silent. Under her fingers, the scar tissue split with a sound like ice breaking over deep water. One sealed eye opened. Then the other golden fire blazed from the blind dragon's gaze. For the first time in a century, every chain in the cavern burned white. The Dragon King gripped the balcony rail, his face stripped of all cold control. And the ancient beast looked directly at Saraphene, bowed its wounded head, and spoke in a voice that shook the mountain. "Daughter of the first Dragon Seers, you survived. Daughter of the first Dragon Seers, you survived." The blind dragon's voice shook the cavern so violently that dust fell from the ceiling like gray snow. Saraphene stood with her palms still pressed to its scarred snout, unable to move, unable to breathe. Golden fire burned in the dragon's newly opened eyes. Not wild, not hungry, but ancient and devastatingly awake. The white scars that had sealed them for a century split wider beneath her touch, revealing pupils like molten suns ringed with black. The beast looked at her as if it had waited through a H100 red years of darkness for this one moment. Above them, the balcony had fallen silent. Then panic broke loose, counselors shouted. Dragon priests backed away from the railing. Noble binders clutched the jeweled collars at their throats as if the dragon's opened eyes had burned through more than blindness. At the center of them all, Dragon King Lucien Ver stood unmoving, one hand still gripping the stone rail, his amber eyes fixed on Saraphene with a shock he did not bother to hide. Counselor Melon recovered first. "Kill her," he said. The words were quiet. That made them more terrifying. The guards at the cavern entrance hesitated. The blind dragon, no, not blind anymore, turned its massive head toward them. One low growl rolled through the chamber, and the 7 dragon bone chains stretched tight. Red binding runes flashed along each link, trying to drag the beast back. The dragon did not retreat. Golden fire leaked from its nostrils, lighting the stone around Saraphene's bare feet. Men's voice sharpened. "She has awakened forbidden blood. She is not a servant. She is a surviving Dragon Seer. End it before she binds the beast." Saraphene looked up at him. "I did not bind it." Her voice echoed strangely in the cavern. The dragon lowered its head beside her, not as a slave lowering to command, but as an elder luring to protect a child. No dragon was born to be bound by her blood. The nobles flinched. Lucien finally spoke from the balcony. Then what did she do? The dragon's burning gaze lifted to him. She listened. The words struck Saraphene harder than the accusation. She had spent her life being useful because she listened to fever, to torn flesh, to children trying not to cry after noble punishments, to dying servants whispering names no one would record. She had thought listening was small, safe, invisible, but in the dragon's mouth. The words sounded older than kings. Melon stepped closer to Lucien. "Your Majesty, the beast has been compromised. Dragon Seer blood can twist dragon memory. That is why the line was erased." The dragon's eyes blazed brighter. "Erased by whom?" "Melon of the Red Council." The counselor went still. The cavern felt suddenly too small. Lucien turned his head slowly toward Maon. "Answer." Melon bowed, elegant despite the sweat beginning at his temple. "The first Dragon Seers rebelled against the crown. They claimed dragons obeyed them before kings. Their bloodline caused the Ashen Schism. This is recorded history." The dragon laughed. It was not a human sound. It was stone cracking under fire recorded by murderers. Saraphene's cut lip throbbed. Her fingers still resting against the dragon's snout burned not with pain but with memory trying to enter her again. She saw flashes now without meaning to. A woman with dark hair like hers standing before a council chamber holding a baby wrapped in blood, red silk dragons circling above a white palace. Lucien, as a boy, maybe 10 years old, watching from behind a pillar as men in red masks dragged a screaming woman away. Saraphene jerked her hand back. The vision vanished. Lucien had seen her face change. "What did it show you? Nothing," she said too quickly. His eyes narrowed. Not cruel dangerously. He moved from the balcony door toward the stairway that descended into the cavern. Melon caught his arm. "Your Majesty, do not go near her." Lucien looked at the hand on his armor. Melon released him. The Dragon King descended alone. Each step echoed through the cavern. The guards moved aside without being ordered. Lucien entered the feeding pit in black armor and gold-edged shadow, his dragon bond cuff glowing faintly at his wrist. The chained dragon watched him approach with an expression too intelligent to be called animal. Saraphene stepped back on instinct. Eloan stopped. He noticed the retreat. She saw that he noticed. Something flickered through his face. Not guilt, not yet, but the beginning of discomfort. A king Unos to realizing his presence could feel like another chain. "You were sentenced under my seal," he said. Saraphene's throat tightened. "Yes, I did not order your death, then your council uses your seal easily." The guards inhaled. No servant spoke to the Dragon King that way. Lucien's jaw tightened, but he did not punish the words. "What is your name?" "She is Saraphene Ash," Melon called from above. "Lower apothecary servant, accused witch." Lucien did not look up. "I asked her." Saraphene held his gaze. "Saraphene." The dragon rumbled beside her. "Not Ash." The golden eyes softened toward her. "Saraphene Orel." The name struck her like a door opening inside her chest. Ael. She had never heard it, yet the moment the dragon said it, her mother's lullaby returned in a language she did not remember learning. Fire under wing sight, under scale daughter, hidden where kings do not kneel. Lucien's face changed. Oral blood was extinguished. The dragon turned its head toward him. "No!" Hidden from the court that blinded me, Melon shouted. "Enough!" His staff slammed against the balcony floor, the chains around the dragon ignited red. The beast roared as the anchors pulled tight, dragging its head away from Saraphene. Pain ripped through the old wounds around its eyes. Saraphene moved without thinking, rushing toward it. Lucien caught her wrist before she reached the burning chain. "Do not touch that," she tried to pull free. "It is hurting him. It will burn through your hand." He opened his eyes because I touched the wound. Lucien's grip loosened at once, not released, loosened. Saraphene looked down at his hand around her wrist. So did he. He let go. The gesture was small, but the dragon saw it, so did men. Lucien lifted his gaze to the balcony and his voice dropped into royal command. "Release the binding flare." Melon bowed stiffly. "I cannot. The beast has awakened unlawful testimony. The Red Council must contain. I am not asking the council." The cavern chilled. Lucien's dragon bond cuff glowed brighter, but the red chains did not obey him. The realization passed over his face like a shadow. The chains answered Melon, not the king. The dragon spoke through pain. Now he sees the first lie. Saraphene stared at Lucien. His power was not absolute. His dragon bond had been built over a chain that answered someone else. Melon's voice rose from above, no longer smooth. "Seize the girl. If her blood opens more memory, everything holding this kingdom together burns." Lucien turned toward the guards. "Touch her," he said, voice quiet and lethal, "and lose the hand." No one moved. Saraphene should have felt safe. She did not, because the dragon's opened eyes were fixed not on Melon now, but on Lucien's golden cuff. The ancient beast whispered, "King of Chains. Ask yourself why your bond does not know your name." Lucien looked down at the cuff on his wrist. For the first time, the Dragon King looked afraid, not of Saraphene, of what had been ruling through him. Then the cavern floor cracked beneath the dragon's chains, and from below rose a memory made of fire. A woman with Saraphene's eyes kneeling before the Red Council while the blind dragon watched, unblinded, roaring in grief. The woman turned toward Lucien in the vision. Not the king, now the child he had been, and she screamed, "Remember who blinded him, remember who blinded him." The woman's scream tore through the cavern memory, and the fire vision shook every chain in the pit. Saraphene stood frozen beside the dragon's massive wounded head, her wrist still burning from where Lucien had caught and released her. The vision unfolded across the cracked cavern floor. A younger version of the Dragon King, only a child then, standing behind a pillar in a council chamber lit by red fire. Before him knelt a woman with Saraphene's eyes, dark hair falling around her blooded face, her hands bound in dragon glass chains. The blind dragon was there too. Only it had not been blind, its eyes had blazed gold as it strained against iron anchors, roaring while council guards dragged the woman toward the center circle. Around them stood men in red council robes. Mayan was younger, his hair still dark, but the cruelty in his face had not changed. The woman looked toward the hidden child prince. "Remember who blinded him," she screamed. Then Melon lifted a dragon glass blade. The vision snapped apart in white fire before the strike landed. Saraphene stumbled back, breathing hard. The dragon groaned beside her, the sound deep enough to tremble through her bones. Its newly opened eyes remained fixed on Lucien, and there was no hatred in them. That made it worse. There was accusation, grief, and an ancient patience that had survived a century of darkness. Lucien did not move. His face had gone still, but not with royal control, this time with shock. The golden cuff around his wrist pulsed in uneven bursts as if it too had seen the memory and did not know whether to deny it. Melon spoke from above. A corrupted memory. "Dragon Seer blood can alter what beasts recall." The dragon's head lifted despite the red chains pulling at its throat. "You burned my eyes because I remembered too clearly." The court on the balcony recoiled. Saraphene looked up at me. "That woman was my mother." Melon's mouth curved faintly. "Your mother was a criminal whose bloodline taught dragons to kneel before witches." The dragon snarled. Saraphene's fear sharpened into something colder. "No, she was a witness." The word struck the cavern. Lucien looked at her then, and for the first time she saw more than suspicion in him. She saw a man realizing the story beneath his crown might have been written before he was old enough to understand it. He turned to Melon. "Why do I not remember that chamber?" Melon bowed his head. "Because you were a child, your majesty," the dragon spoke. "Because they sealed the memory into your cuff." Lucien looked down at the golden dragon bond around his wrist. Saraphene saw it now too. The cuff was beautiful from afar, forged in royal gold, shaped like a coiled dragon biting its own tail. But up close, tiny red runes crawled beneath the surface. Not bond runes, lock runes. She had seen similar marks on old wound clasps in the apothecary, used to keep torn flesh from opening too soon. Only this wound was memory. Lucien's voice lowered. Who forged this cuff? No one answered. That was answer enough. Melon's expression hardened. Your Majesty, the royal bond cuff is sacred. It has passed through your line since the Ashen Schism. Without it, dragons would not recognize the throne. The dragon laughed again, bitter and immense. Dragons recognize truth before thrones learn to steal it. The red chains flared, the dragon roared in pain. Saraphene moved toward the nearest chain, but Lucien stepped in front of her, not touching, not blocking completely, only placing himself close enough to take the first burn if the chain lashed. Tell me what you see, he said. Saraphene stared at him. You believe me now? No. His jaw tightened, but I believe they are afraid of what you can show. It was not enough, but it was honest. She looked at the chain. Pain spoke from it like fever, not just the dragon's pain. The chain remembered hands forging it. Blood poured into its runes. A command hidden beneath royal law. It does not only bind him, she whispered. It feeds your cuff. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Saraphene stepped closer, careful not to touch the burning metal. The dragon's sight was sealed into the chain. His memory became part of your royal bond. That is why the chain answers Melon and not you. The council controls the wound that powers your throne. The cavern went silent. Above, several noble binders looked down at their own jeweled collars with sudden fear. Lucien turned slowly toward the balcony. Is this true? Melon's face became a mask. It is necessary. A ripple of horror moved through the watchers. Lucien's voice turned lethal. Necessary. Your father was weak, Melon said, no longer pretending softness. Dragons followed seers before kings. If we allowed Orel blood to survive, your reign would have begun under a beast's judgment instead of law. We gave you a crown. Dragons would obey. You gave me a lie. We gave you a kingdom. The golden cuff burned around Lucien's wrist. He flinched just once, but Saraphene saw it. The cuff was punishing him for rejection, the same way the chains punished the dragon for memory. The old beast lowered its head toward Saraphene. Daughter of Orel, the first seal is sight, the second is name, the third is choice. Saraphene swallowed. What does that mean? To break a stolen bond. The king must see what was taken, hear the name that was erased, and choose without command. Men shouted, silence it. The red chains tightened around the dragon's throat. Saraphene could not bear the sound it made. She stepped forward and pressed both hands to the wounded snout again. Memory surged. This time, she saw more clearly. Her mother Eloan Orel standing before the Red Council, the dragon beside her, golden-eyed and unchained. Child Lucien hidden nearby. Melon holding the bond cuff before it was finished. Elo saying, if you build a crown from stolen sight one day, your king will mistake obedience for loyalty. Then Melon gave the order. Guards drove burning dragon glass into the beast's eyes. Saraphene screamed with the memory. Lucien staggered as the same vision struck him through the cuff. He saw himself as a child watching and forgetting. He saw Melon kneel before him afterward, fastening the golden cuff to his wrist. He heard the council say the dragon had gone blind from age. When the vision ended, Lucien was on one knee. His face was pale with rage. Eloan Orel, he said. The cavern shook, the dragon's eyes blazed. Saraphene's heart stopped for a beat. Her mother's name had been spoken by the king. The first seal broke, one of the 7 chains snapped from the wall. Mine shouted in fury. Lucien rose slowly, blood at his wrist where the cuff had burned him. His gaze found Saraphene's, no longer cold, no longer certain. What was your mother to you? He asked, though the answer was already in his face. Saraphene lifted her chin. The woman your council murdered. The dragon bowed its head behind her, and from the broken chain, golden fire spilled across the cavern floor, forming one word in the old dragon tongue. Witness. Witness. The word burned across the cavern floor in golden dragon fire. Saraphene stared at it while the broken chain smoked against the stone. Azerion's restored eyes blazed above her. No longer blind, no longer silent, but still bound by 6 dragon bone anchors carved with red council runes. The beast's breath shook the cavern walls. Its wounds were old, but its rage had only just remembered how to move. On the balcony, the nobles were no longer whispering, they were afraid. That frightened Melon more than the dragon. The counselor struck his staff against the rail. Do not listen to it, a dragon sears blood, twists memory, that word means nothing. Azerion lifted its scarred head. Witness is what your council fears most. Lucien stood in the feeding pit, with blood darkening the skin beneath his golden bond cuff. The cuff had burned him when he spoke Saraphene's mother's name. It still glowed now, pulsing in uneven bursts as if punishing him for doubt. He looked at Saraphene. The first seal was sight. Yes, she said, though her voice shook, the second his name. Azerion's gaze turned toward her. Saraphene understood before the dragon spoke. She had lived under a false name because false names were safer for people the court wanted erased. Saraphene Ash. Ash for a servant. Ash for what remained after fire. Ash for a girl who was supposed to survive quietly and never ask what had burned before her. But the dragon had called her Orel. Now it waited for its own truth. Lucien looked at the beast. The records call you Vorinth. Azerion's eyes dimmed with something almost like sorrow. That is the chain's name, not mine. A silence fell so heavy that even the flame seemed to lower. Melon's face tightened. Your Majesty? Old dragon names were sealed after the Ashen Schism for the realm's protection. Lucien's mouth hardened. I am beginning to despise the way you use protection. Saraphene stepped closer to Azerion. The remaining chain scraped against the stone as the dragon lowered its head until its scarred brow hovered before her. Heat rolled from its scales, but beneath the heat she felt pain. Old pain, patient pain, pain that had been forced to live without a name. Can I hear it? She whispered. The dragon closed its eyes. Permissio Saraphene placed her palm between the two newly opened eyes. The scar tissue was rough beneath her fingers, still wet with broken magic. Memory rose through her hand, but this time it did not come as a vision of murder. It came as storm over black cliffs, fire beneath the first dawn, wings cutting through cloud, a hatchling opening its eyes to a woman with Saraphene's bloodline. A name entered her throat not spoken by her, remembered through her Azerion. The cavern exploded with gold, 3 chains snapped at once. Azerion roared its true name for the first time in 100 years, and the sound rolled through Draventhornne like a mountain breaking open. The balcony cracked, dragon priests fell to their knees. Noble binders screamed as the jeweled collars at their throats lit with hidden red runes. Lucien staggered, his cuff burned white-hot. Saraphene turned toward him. Take it off, I cannot. The words came through clenched teeth. Melon lifted both hands. Binders reinforced the king's cuff. Several nobles obeyed on instinct, touching their collars. But the moment they did, Azerion's name echoed again. Their jewels cracked. Red smoke spilled from the broken settings. And one lord collapsed as the dragon bond mark at his throat vanished. Lucien stared at them. Their bonds were false too. Not all, Azerion said. Some were born true. Then rewritten, the words struck the cavern harder than fire. Saraphene looked at the remaining chains. How many dragons? Azerion lowered its head. All who forgot, they could refuse. Lucien's face changed. Not fear now, guilt. He looked at his cuff as if it had become a serpent around his wrist. My crown was built on this. Melon's voice sharpened from above. Your crown kept this kingdom alive. No, Saraphene said before she could stop herself. It kept dragons obedient. The cavern went still. No servant girl should have said that before the Dragon King. Lucien looked at her. His expression was dangerous but not angry in the way she expected. It was the face of a man standing at the edge of a truth he could no longer command away. Azerion spoke again. The third seal is choice. Lucien's eyes remained on Saraphene. What choice? Melon answered first. Your kingdom. Azerion's golden gaze narrowed. No, the choice is whether he remains king through stolen sight and stolen names or stands before dragons without a chain between them. The cuff tightened around Lucien's wrist. Blood ran over his hand. For the first time, Saraphene saw the cost clearly. If Lucien rejected the cuff, he might lose command over every dragon bond in Draventhornne. Noble houses would rebel, the army might fracture, the court would blame the secret witch who made dragons remember older loyalties. Melon smiled because he saw the same thing. Remove it, he said softly. And you are no longer Dragon King. You are only a man standing beside the last bloodline your ancestors failed to bury. Lucien looked at Azerion, then at Saraphene. I would rather be a man beside truth, he said, than a king enthroned by blindness. The final chains trembled. Lucien gripped the cuff and pulled. The gold did not break, it cut deeper into his flesh. Drinking his blood, he dropped to one knee but did not release it. Saraphene knelt in front of him, close enough to help, not close enough to claim his choice. Say it. Lucien's breath tore through him. Before the council, before the chained dragon, before the servant girl his court had sent to die, he spoke. I choose sight over obedience, name over command, witness over throne. The cuff cracked, Azerion roared. Saraphene lifted her hand. Lucien reached toward it, not taking, asking. She placed her fingers over the broken cuff. Golden fire surged between them. The cuff shattered. The last 3 chains broke from Azerion's body. And as the ancient dragon rose to its full height for the first time in a century, every dragon in Draventhornne began to roar. Every dragon in Draventhornne began to roar. The sound came from far beyond the feeding pit. It rolled down from mountain roofs, war towers, noble courtyards, cliffside stables, and hidden caverns where old dragons had not raised their heads in decades. The whole kingdom answered Azerion's true name. In the cavern, the ancient dragon stood free. Broken chains slid from its scarred body and crashed to the stone. Its wings opened slowly, torn but enormous, filling the feeding pit with shadow and gold fire. Saraphene remained on one knee before Lucien, her hand still hovering where his cuff had shattered. A faint golden mark glowed across her palm, shaped like an open dragon eye. Melon saw it from the balcony. His face lost color. Seer mark. The nobles around him recoiled as if the mark were contagious. Lucien looked at Saraphene's palm. What does it mean? Azerion lowered its head. First sight returned. Saraphene curled her fingers instinctively. She had spent her life hiding every strange thing about herself. Now the truth was burning in her hand before the entire court. Melon struck his staff against the balcony floor, sealed the cavern. Guards pulled iron levers along the wall. Massive gates began to descend over the cavern mouth and the flight shaft above. If they closed, Azerion would be trapped again. Saraphene would be trapped with him. Lucien, without his cuff, would stand cut off from the court and easy to accuse. Lucien turned toward the guards. Stop, they hesitated. That hesitation revealed more than rebellion, it revealed uncertainty. The golden cuff was broken. The old command system had cracked with it. The Dragon King's voice no longer carried the same invisible force for one dangerous moment. Everyone saw the difference between obedience and loyalty. Melon smiled. You see, Your Majesty, this is what she has done. One touch from a witch and even your guards question whether you are still king. Lucien looked at the men by the levers, then he lowered his sword. I will not command you, he said. I will tell you what you are witnessing. The Red Council blinded Azerion. They stole his sight to strengthen the throne. They erased the Orel bloodline because dragons remembered truth before crowns. If you close those gates, you are not protecting Draventhornne. You are returning a witness to darkness. The guards froze. One young guard looked down at the bones scattered near the cavern wall. They told us the dragon killed servants. Azerion's golden eyes dimmed. They sent me the condemned, the dying, the nameless, the dragon said. They salted fear into the meat and bound hunger to rage. They made a prison, then called the prisoner a monster. Saraphene looked at the bones bracelets, torn cloth servant beads. Lives erased into a feeding schedule, her throat tightened. How many? Too many, Azerion said. The young guard released his lever. Then another guard did. The gates stopped halfway. Melon's mask broke. Tia titters. Before Lucien could speak, Melon slammed his staff down 3 times. The cavern floor pulsed red. Azerion went still. Saraphene felt dread move through the dragon before it spoke. No. Lucien turned to him. What is beneath us? A crack opened through the feeding trench. From below rose a black glass cage filled with molten red light. Inside floated 2 golden dragon eyes, scarred and preserved, burning with stolen memory. Saraphene covered her mouth. Azerion recoiled as if the cage were a blade. Melon spread his arms. The kingdom required sight. If the beast would not serve willingly, its eyes could still serve law. Lucien stared in horror. You powered the bond system with his severed eyes with disciplined witness, Melon said. The only kind a realm can survive. The cage pulsed across the balcony. Noble dragon binders screamed as their collars reignited. In the distance, the dragon's roars twisted into pain. The severed eyes were calling stolen bonds back into force. Saraphene looked at Azerion. If I open it all, dragons will remember, the ancient beast said. And you, Azerion's voice lowered. I will remember what they made me see. Lucien stepped forward, blood still dripping from his broken wrist. Then I witness it with you. Azerion looked at him. A king may not survive the memory of his crown. Lucien's gaze moved to Saraphene. He did not ask her to soften the truth. He did not ask her to save his throne. Then let the crown bleed honestly, he said. Saraphene placed her marked palm against the black glass cage. The severed eyes opened wider inside, and every stolen dragon memory in Draventhornne rushed toward her. Every stolen dragon memory in Draventhornne rushed toward Saraphene. It struck her like fire poured into bone. She saw the first collar forged in the Red Council vault, its gold cooled in dragon blood, while Melon's predecessor whispered that obedience was more useful than trust. She saw young dragons lowering their heads willingly to riders they loved only for council runes to be slipped into the bond afterward, tightening affection into command. She saw old dragons refusing war and being marked as unstable. She saw hatchlings taken from mothers because a noble house wanted loyal fire before loyalty had time to choose. Then came Azerion's memories, the worst ones. His severed eyes had been placed inside the black glass cage while he still lived above it, chained and blinded through those stolen eyes. He had been forced to watch generations of dragons bent under false bonds. He had watched servants sent into his pit, watched children of the Orel line hunted, watched Lucien grow from a silent prince into a crowned king wearing a cuff powered by the wound beneath his own palace. Saraphene screamed. Lucien caught her before she fell, then froze as if afraid touching her might force more pain into her body, but Saraphene gripped his arm first, anchoring herself to something living. While the memories tore through her, Melon shouted from the balcony, "Close the cage. If she survives the memory, she will turn every dragon against us." Azerion's voice thundered through the cavern. "No, she will let them remember." The black glass cage cracked beneath Saraphene's palm. Golden fire leaked through the fracture across the balcony. The noble binders cried out as their collars split one by one. Some fell to their knees, clutching throats suddenly free of false command. Others looked terrified, not because dragons attacked them, but because for the first time their dragons were no longer forced to answer. Lucien looked toward the broken cage. His face was pale. "Saraphene." She heard the warning in his voice. The memory was too much. If she kept holding it alone, it would burn through her mind. Azerion had said second sight was memory, but memory was not meant to be carried by one body. That had been the Council's crime. Taking witness and turning it into a machine, Saraphene forced her eyes open. "I cannot hold all of it." Azerion lowered his head. "Then do not. How return it to those who lived it?" The answer terrified her. If every dragon remembered at once, Draventhornne might burn before dawn. Riders might be thrown from cliffs. Noble houses might collapse into slaughter. Melon had used that fear as a cage, but fear did not become false just because a villain spoke it. Lucien understood the risk. Can it be witnessed without becoming war? Saraphene looked at him. For once, the king was not asking how to command the outcome. He was asking how to survive the truth without chaining it again. She pressed her burning palm harder against the glass, only if they choose to see. The sear mark on her hand opened. A ring of golden fire spread from the cage across the cavern floor, then upward through the mountain. It did not force every memory into every mind. It carried an invitation. Witness what was stolen from you if you are ready to know. The first to answer was Azerion. He took back his own severed sight. The black glass cage shattered. The two preserved eyes dissolved into gold fire and streamed back into the scars around his living gaze. Azerion roared, not in pain this time, but in grief finally returned to its rightful body. The cavern shook. Red Council runes burned away from the broken chains. The feeding pit gates lifted by themselves, not from royal command, but because the old dragon no longer accepted the shape of a prison. Then other dragons answered. Far above in the war cliffs, one dragon shattered its collar and lowered its head to the rider who had once saved it as a hatchling. In the noble courtyards, another turned away from a lord who had never loved it, leaving him standing powerless in gold and terror. In hidden caverns, old beasts opened eyes clouded by false sleep. Some roared, some wept fire. None flew to burn the city, not yet. The kingdom held its breath. Melon's face twisted as his last weapon failed to become chaos. Lucien released Saraphene only when she stood on her own. His voice was rough. "You gave them choice." Saraphene looked up at him. "No, I returned what your council stole." The words hurt him. "Good, they needed to." Melon turned from the balcony, moving fast toward the council exit. As Aran's head snapped toward him, he runs to the red archive. Lucien's eyes hardened. What is there the first bond record Azerion said the law that made stolen sight legal? Melon paused at the archway and looked back, his elegance gone, his fear naked. If that record opens, every dragon bond in Draventhornne can be challenged. Your army will fracture, your throne will stand on ash, Lucien stepped forward, then it will finally stand on what is real. Saraphene looked at Azerion. Can we reach the archive before he seals it? The dragon lowered one wing torn but still powerful, creating a path toward his back. For a moment, Saraphene forgot how to breathe. Azerion said, "Daughter of Orel, you open my eyes. Now ride with the king and open the law." Lucien looked at her, not ordering, not assuming. Saraphene climbed first, only then did Lucien follow. Azerion rose through the open flight shaft, carrying them into the storm above Draventh, while below them the Red Council bells began to ring for war. The Red Council bells rang for war. Azerion burst from the mountain through the half-open flight shaft, carrying Saraphene and Lucien into the storm above Draventh. Rain struck Saraphene's face like cold needles. Wind tore at her loose hair and smoke-gray dress. Beneath them, the palace spread across the black cliffs in rings of iron towers, red bridges and dragon roosts carved into the mountain face. Everywhere dragons were waking. Some circled uncertainly over their towers, collars cracked and smoking. Some remained beside their riders, not because chains held them now, but because memory had not destroyed trust where trust had truly existed. Others perched on rooflines and stared down at the palace with golden green and ember red eyes, waiting to see whether the king would choose truth beyond the safety of the pit. Saraphene gripped one of Azerion's scarred spine ridges. Lucia sat behind her, one hand braced against the ancient dragon's scale. He did not hold her waist. He could have. The wind would have made it easy to pretend necessity. Instead, he kept enough distance for her to feel the choice in it. Below the red archive tower lit with crimson fire, Azerion angled toward it. "The first bond record is beneath that tower," he said, his voice carrying through bone and air. "If Melon seals it, he can claim the memories were Dragon Seer corruption." Lucien's voice was cold. "Then we reach it first." Saraphene looked back at him. Rain streamed down his face, blood still marked his wrist where the cuff had shattered. He looked less like the untouchable Dragon King now and more dangerous because of it. A man stripped of the lie that made obedience easy. "You understand what happens if it opens?" she asked. His eyes met hers. "Every bond can be questioned. Every noble house may turn on you. They already serve the council if truth makes them my enemy." Azerion gave a low, approving rumble. They descended toward the archive roof. Red Road guards waited with dragon glass spears. Melon stood at the entrance below them, one hand pressed to the sealed door, chanting in the old council tongue. Lines of red fire crawled over the stone, forming a lock shaped like a closed dragon eye. Saraphene felt the seer mark in her palm burn. He is sealing it with stolen sight. Azerion landed hard enough to crack the roof tiles. Guards scattered some lifted spears. Lucien rose to his feet on the dragon's back and looked down at them, without crown, without cuff, without forced bond for a heartbeat. No one knew what made him king. Then he spoke, "Stand aside if you serve Draventh." The guards hesitated. Melon turned, face twisted with fury. He no longer bears the royal cuff. He has broken the bond law. By Red Council decree, Lucien Ver is unfit until the council restores order. The words should have shaken the guards into obedience. Instead, one of them looked at Azerion. The ancient dragon's restored eyes burned in the rain. The guard lowered his spear. Then another. Melon's mouth tightened. Lucien stepped down from Azerion's wing onto the roof. Saraphene followed her bare feet, landing on wet black stone. The red lock on the archive door pulsed harder as she approached. Melon stared at her. "You do not know what you are opening." Saraphene lifted her marked palm. "That is why I am opening it." He struck with his staff. Lucien moved, but Saraphene's mark answered first. Golden fire flared from her palm, not attacking Melon, but striking the red seal on the door. The closed dragon eye cracked open. The archive doors groaned, and a wind rushed out, carrying the smell of old parchment dragon ash and blood-dried lore. Inside the red archive was not filled with books alone. It was filled with collars, hundreds of them hung from black iron hooks. Gold cuffs, jeweled throat rings, warbond clasps, hatchling tags. Each one was tied to a scroll written in red ink. At the center of the chamber stood a stone table holding the first bond record. A huge slab of dragon bone carved with laws so old the letters seemed burned into the marrow. Saraphene stepped inside. The sea mark opened wider. Memories stirred in every collar. A whisper rose from the first record. "Dragons obey the crown because dragons forget." Lucien's face hardened. Melon entered behind them slowly. Gods refusing to follow him. "You think that sentence is cruelty. It is survival. Dragons remember every wound, every betrayal, every abandoned hatchling. Without the crown, their memory becomes fire." Azerion lowered his head into the doorway, too large to enter fully. "And with your law, memory became property." Saraphene approached the dragon bone slab. The first bond record was not merely written, it was alive with stolen witness. She saw Eloan Orel, her mother, standing in this chamber years ago, bloodied but unbowed, pointing at the record while Azerion roared outside. She had discovered the hidden law. She had tried to open it before the court. Melon had stopped her. Saraphene looked at the counselor. You killed her here. His eyes hardened. Your mother would have freed dragons from every military bond on the eve of war. She would have let them choose. She would have made the crown beg beasts for loyalty. Lucien stepped forward. Perhaps it should have. The archive trembled. The first record brightened. Truth. Melon's control broke. He lunged toward the slab and drew a dagger of red dragon glass from his sleeve. If the record cannot be sealed, it will be destroyed. Saraphene moved faster than fear. She placed both hands on the dragon bone slab. The seer mark burned open. Every caller in the archive awakened at once. 1,000 stolen memories rose into the chamber, circling them like firebirds. Dragons choosing riders, dragons being betrayed, dragons still loving humans who had once loved them back, dragons breaking under command, dragons waiting for one honest question. Saraphene's voice shook, but it carried. No bond stands by stolen memory, no dragon obeys through blinded sight, no crown owns witness. The first record cracked, Melon screamed and drove the dagger toward her hands. Lucien caught his wrist, not with royal magic, with blooded human strength. The two men struggled over the slab, rain blowing through the open doors behind them. Melon snarled, "You will lose everything." Lucien's eyes flashed amber. "Then what remains will be mine." Honestly, he forced Melon's dagger down into the first record. The dragon bone slab split. Golden fire erupted across Draventhornne. Every dragon bond flared once, then loosened, not broken. Offered. A choice passed through the kingdom. Remain, leave, forgive, refuge, remember. Some dragons lifted from their roosts and flew into the storm alone. Some stayed beside riders who fell weeping to their knees. Some turned on cruel masters and burned only the collars, not the flesh beneath. The sky filled with decisions. Melon staggered back, horrified. "You have ended the kingdom," Azerion's voice rolled through the archive. "No, they have ended the leash." Saraphene swayed, the seer mark dimming in her palm. Lucien turned toward her, but before he could speak, the broken first record revealed one final memory. Eloan Orel holding infant Saraphene in the archive shadows, while Azerion, still unblinded, lowered his head to them both. Eloan whispered, "If she survives, she must not inherit my war. She must inherit the choice I died trying to protect." The memory faded. Saraphene stood trembling. Then the archive floor opened beneath the broken slab. A stairway of red stone descended into a chamber older than the council. Azerion went still. Lucien looked at him. What is below? The ancient dragon's restored eyes darkened. "The first seer throne," he said. Where dragons once chose kings, from below rose a pulse of golden fire, and every dragon in the sky turned toward Saraphene. Every dragon in the sky turned toward Saraphene. The pull of their attention struck harder than wind. She stood at the edge of the opened archive floor, rain blowing through the shattered doors behind her, the broken first bond record still glowing with golden fire. Below, the redstone stairway descended into a chamber older than the Red Council, older than the royal cuff, older than every lie Melon had called law. At its base pulsed a throne made not of gold or bone, but of dark volcanic stone veined with living flame. The first seer throne, where dragons once chose kings. Saraphene felt the seer mark in her palm open again, not painfully this time. Hungrily, Melon saw it and laughed, though his voice shook. "Go down then, let the seer throne judge you. Let every dragon in Draventhornne see what your blood really is." Lucien turned toward him. "You sound less afraid than you should." Men's eyes glittered. "Because Dragon Seers never ruled gently. That is the history your pretty witness has not shown you. Before, King Seers did not ask dragons to choose. They stood on that throne and made every beast hear them." Azerion's enormous head lowered into the archive doorway. A half-truth sharpened into a blade. Saraphene looked at the ancient dragon. What happened there? The dragon's restored eyes dimmed. The first seer throne was made for asking, not ruling. A true seer stood before dragons and heard whether they accepted the one who wished to lead. But power learned quickly how to imitate listening. Melon smiled. "Exactly. Your bloodline broke before ours did." The words struck Saraphene because they did not feel entirely false. She looked down the red stairway. If the throne had been corrupted once, it could be corrupted again. If she descended, the court might claim she intended to place herself above dragons and kings. If she refused, Melon would use fear of her blood to rebuild the council's lies. Lucien stepped beside her, leaving space between them. You do not have to go down because the dragons are looking. Saraphene looked at him. If I do not, he will make my fear into proof. He will try, and your nobles will listen. Lucien's jaw tightened. He did not deny it. That honesty mattered. Saraphene descended first. The stairway warmed beneath her bare feet. Lucien followed one step behind, not leading her into a chamber his crown did not understand. Azerion could not fit through the archive floor, but his voice followed them down like thunder under stone. Do not sit unless you are willing to hear. Refusal. The chamber below was circular and vast, open at the center to a shaft of stormlit sky. The seer throne rose beneath that opening, black and red, shaped like a dragon's folded wing. Around it were carved thousands of claw marks, each one belonging to a dragon that had once chosen, refused, or witnessed a ruler. Saraphene stepped before it. The throne did not glow, it waited. Lucien stopped at the edge of the circle. What must happen? Azerion answered from above. The king asks, the seer listens, the dragons answer. Melon's voice echoed from the stair behind them. He had followed at a distance, limping, blood on his sleeve, still refusing to surrender. And if they refuse him, what then, Lucien? Will you give up the crown because beasts wounded by memory no longer trust you? Lucien looked toward the storm opening above. Dragons circled there. Not all of them. Enough. Wings moved through rain and firelight. Some were war dragons, some noble bonded, some old beasts from hidden roosts. Their eyes shone down into the chamber like stars that had learned to judge. Lucien stepped into the circle, not onto the throne. Before it, I ask no dragon to obey me through stolen sight, he said. I ask no bond to remain because law once made refusal impossible. If Draventhornne is to stand, let it stand on chosen fire. The chamber shook. Saraphene's sea mark blazed. The dragons answered, not with words, with memory. A war dragon showed Lucien a battlefield where his command had saved its rider. It would stay. A white cliff dragon showed a noble boy beating a hatchling until it bowed. It would leave. A scarred red female showed a rider who had loved her truly but inherited a collar he never questioned. She would return only if he broke the collar himself. One by one, choices flowed through Saraphene, and she let them pass, refusing to shape them. Then came the darker memories. Dragons who wanted vengeance. Dragons who wanted towers burned. Dragons who wanted every council house reduced to ash. Saraphene swayed beneath the force of it. Melon's voice came sharp with triumph. There, hear them. This is what I warned you of. Memory becomes fire. Fire becomes slaughter. Choose seer, restrain them, or let them burn the kingdom that feared them. Saraphene gripped the edge of the throne but did not sit. The old temptation opened beneath her palm. She could push calm into the dragon voices. She could soften rage. She could become what Melon feared and what his ancestors had claimed to prevent. Lucien saw the struggle in her face. Saraphene, he said quietly, do not save my kingdom by becoming another chain. The words steadied her. She lifted her marked hand toward the storm above. I will not command your grief, she said to the dragons. But witness is not permission to become what wounded you. Choose justice, refuse chains, break false bonds, leave cruel riders, but do not burn the innocent to teach the guilty fear. The chamber held still. Then Azerion's voice rolled from above. A seer who does not command. One by one, the dragons lowered their heads in the sky. Not to Lucien, not exactly to Saraphene. To the choice she had protected. Men's face emptied of color, the first seer throne ignited behind Saraphene, not beneath her. Golden fire climbed its edges and revealed the final truth carved into its back. The throne does not crown the seer, it witnesses the choice. Lucien looked at the words, then at Melon. Your counsel hid that line. Melon backed toward the stairs. We preserved order. No, Saraphene said, you preserved fear. The throne answered with fire, truth. The golden flame shot upward through the storm shaft, spreading across the sky. Every dragon saw the hidden lore. Every rider felt it. Every bond in Draventh changed from command to question. Melon rem, Lucien moved to follow, but Saraphene stopped him with one word. Wait. From above came the sound of massive claws striking stone. Azerion had reached the archive roof. His voice filled the chamber. Let the first witness judge the man who stole witness. Men's scream echoed down the stairway. Not death fear. When Lucien and Saraphene reached the archive again, Melon lay pinned beneath one of Azerion's claws, alive, shaking. His staff snapped in two. Around him, guards stood back, no longer certain whether loyalty meant protecting the counselor or letting truth breathe. Azerion lowered his head until one golden eye filled Melon's world. Open the red council vault, the dragon said. Melon's lips trembled. There is nothing left, Azerion's teeth glowed with fire. Lie poorly again, and I will let every dragon you chained hear your heartbeat. Melon closed his eyes, then with a shaking hand he pressed his blood to the archive wall. A hidden door opened behind the first bond record. Inside waited rows of sealed names, oral names, dragon names, children's names. At the center of the vault lay a small blood-red silk bundle. Saraphene stepped toward it, heart pounding. Inside was a child's bracelet made of gold thread and one tiny dragon scale. Beside it, a record written in her mother's hand. Saraphene Orel, living heir of the first seers, hidden, so dragons may one day choose without being commanded by her blood. Saraphene's breath broke. Lucien stood beside her in silence. Melon whispered from beneath Azerion's claw. Now you know why she had to die. Saraphene lifted her mother's record. No, she said. Now I know why her truth had to live. And above Draventhornne, the dragons began circling the palace, not to attack, not to obey, but to wait for the trial that would finally name what had been done to them. The dragons circled the palace until the sky itself looked crowned in fire. Below them, Draventhornne stopped pretending it was calm. Nobles poured from the archive towers in frightened clusters, clutching cracked bond collars and smoking cuffs. Soldiers gathered in the rain with dragon glass spears they no longer trusted. Red council scribes dragged sealed ledgers from hidden rooms only to freeze when dragons landed on the rooftops above them, watching every document with eyes that remembered too much. Saraphene stood in the red archive vault with her mother's record pressed against her chest. Saraphene Orel, living heir of the first seers. The words should have made her feel powerful. They made her feel orphaned all over again. She could imagine her mother writing that record with shaking hands, hiding a bracelet and a dragon scale while knowing the council would come for her. Hidden, so dragons may one day choose without being commanded by her blood. Her mother had not saved Saraphene to become a queen of dragons. She had saved her to protect the one thing kings and councils feared most: choice. Lucien stood near the broken first bond record, rain darkening his black armor, blood still dried around his wrist where the cuff had shattered. He had not touched Saraphene since the cavern unless she reached first. That restraint had begun to matter too much. Azerion kept Melon pinned beneath one massive claw. The counselor no longer looked elegant. His white hair had fallen loose. Blood marked one temple. His staff lay snapped across the archive floor. Still hatred made his voice steady. You think a trial will heal this, Melon said. The dragons will listen today because the wound is fresh. Tomorrow, memory will become hunger. Hunger will become fire. You will beg for the council's chains when the first noble house burns. Saraphene looked at him. You keep mistaking freedom for chaos because control is the only peace you understand. His mouth twisted, spoken like a girl who has never ruled anything. No, she said, spoken like a girl who is almost fed to your lie. Azerion pressed one claw slightly harder. Melon gasped. Lucien's voice cut through the chamber. Take him to the throne hall. Melon laughed through pain. With what authority your cuff is broken? Your council has revoked your bond law. Your dragon army is deciding whether it still belongs to you. Lucien looked toward the open archive doors where dragons lined the palace roofs through sheets of rain. His face was pale but unflinching. Then I will stand without borrowed authority. The words moved through Saraphene quietly. A king without a leash, a king without certainty. That was more dangerous to Melon than any crown. They brought him to the throne hall by dawn. The hall was built from black volcanic stone and red-veined marble with dragonbone pillars climbing toward a ceiling painted with old victories. At the far end stood the dragon throne empty beneath its crown of carved wings. Lucien did not sit on it, he stood before it. The choice rippled through the court. Saraphene stood several steps away, not beside him yet, not behind him either. Azerion lowered his scarred body across the open doors too large to enter fully, his golden eyes visible behind the columns. Above the broken roof line, dozens of dragons watched through the storm. Melon was forced to kneel before the court he had ruled from behind sealed records. Lucien turned to the gathered nobles, binders, priests, guards, and servants. This trial begins under witness. No dragon will be compelled to obey. No servant will be silenced as property of a house. No council seal will hide a record. A red priest stepped forward, shaking. Your Majesty, if dragons are permitted to witness judgment, fear may guide verdict. Saraphene lifted her marked palm. Then let fear be named, not obeyed. The sea mark opened. Golden light spread across the floor, not forcing memory into anyone's mind, but laying witness before the hall. The first vision showed Eloan Orel standing in the red archive exposing the first bond record, then Melon ordering her seized. Then Azerion unblinded and chained roaring as she was dragged away. The second vision showed the council chamber, Eloan I's child Lucien hidden behind a pillar, Azerion's golden eyes watching everything. Melon lifted the dragon glass blade. The court saw the strike this time. They saw fire burn into Azerion's eyes, saw the dragon collapse screaming, saw Lucien's memory sealed into the golden cuff, saw Melon fastening the royal bond onto the child prince's wrist and whispering, "A king does not need to remember what keeps him safe." Lucien closed his eyes once. When he opened them, the hall saw his grief, not weakness. Grief. Melon looked around desperately. "Yes, I did it. I preserved the crown. Eloan Orel would have broken every war bond during a border crisis. Dragons would have chosen grief over strategy. The realm would have fallen." Saraphene stepped forward. Then why erase the children? The hall went silent. She held up her mother's record. If this was only war, why hunt every Orel child? Why hide their names? Why send me to the feeding pit instead of trial? Melon's jaw tightened. Azerion answered from the doorway. Because a living seer could ask dragons what they remembered. The court shifted. Lucien looked at Melon. "Answer her." Melon's mask returned in fragments. Because bloodlines become banners. One surviving Orel girl could start a rebellion. Seraphine's voice was soft. "I was a servant in your lower halls. I wrapped burns. I ground herbs. I healed a hatchling because it was crying." The vision changed. The court saw her in the lower apothecary soot on her cheek, touching the injured hatchling's wing while nobles argued over ownership. They saw the hatchling calm bow trust. They saw Melon's spy watching through the doorway. Then they saw the order written in Lucien's seal. "Feed her to the blind dragon." Lucien turned toward me, deadly still. "You used my seal." Melon said nothing. The sea mark flared. Truth did not need his confession. Lucien faced the court. Counselor Melon will stand trial for murder, memory theft, unlawful bond corruption, misuse of royal seal, and the attempted execution of Saraphene Orel. A noble lord shouted from the back. "And what of the dragons who leave? What of the armies that fracture? What of houses whose bonds are broken?" Lucien looked toward the dragons in the rain, then back at the hall. "Then we learn which bonds were loyalty and which were chains." The hall erupted, but above the noise Azerion lifted his head and spoke. "The first judgment is not Melon's," every voice died. Saraphene turned slowly. As Ian's golden eyes fixed on Lucien, the first judgment belongs to the Dragon King who wore a stolen cuff and ruled through blinded sight. The cord froze. Lucien did not move. Saraphene's chest tightened, but she did not speak for him. Azerion lowered his scarred head. "Lucien V, will you stand before dragons without crown cuff counsel or command?" Melon smiled from his knees. Seeing one last chance, Lucien removed the dragon crown from his belt. Where a guard had carried it after the chaos, he placed it on the floor. Then he stepped away from the throne. "Yes," he said. The dragons outside lowered from the rooftops one by one until the palace shook beneath their weight. Azerion's eyes burned brighter. "Then hear what your crown cost us. Then hear what your crown cost us." Azerion's voice filled the throne hall, and every dragon outside lowered its head toward the open roof. Lucien stood before them without crown cuff counsel or command. Rain fell through the broken ceiling onto his black armor. Blood marked his wrist where the royal bond had shattered. Behind him, the dragon throne waited empty. In front of him stood the ancient dragon whose eyes had been stolen to power the kingdom he inherited. Saraphene stood several steps away. Her mother's record still pressed to her chest. She wanted to defend him. She did not. If Lucien was to become anything other than the king his council had built, he had to stand inside the truth without her softening its edges. Azerion opened his restored eyes. Golden witness spread across the hall. The dragons showed Lucien what his reign had cost, not in accusations but in memories. A war dragon forced to burn a village because its rider's collar tightened when it refused. A mother dragon separated from 3 hatchlings so noble sons could inherit fire early. An old green beast chained beneath a tower after refusing to carry soldiers into a treaty massacre. A young dragon who loved its rider only to feel that love rewritten into obedience by Red Council law. Lucien did not look away. His face went pale. His jaw tightened until blood darkened his lip where he bit down, but he watched every memory. Then came the human cost. Servants sent into the feeding pit under sealed orders. Healers punished for asking why dragon wounds were never recorded. Children born with oral blood erased from ledgers. Saraphene's mother Eloan dragged from the Red Archive after exposing the first bond record. Saraphene herself, younger and hungry, sleeping near apothecary shelves because servants without names were easier to lose. The last memory showed Lucien as a child, Melon fastening the golden cuff around his wrist. A king does not need to remember what keeps him safe. The vision ended. The hall was silent except for rain. Lucien lowered his head, not to Azerion alone. To every dragon watching, I wore the lie, he said. I gave orders through it. I accepted loyalty without asking whether it was choice. I cannot claim innocence because I inherited the chain instead of forging it. Melon's smile faded. Lucien turned to the court. The Red Council taught me that control was stability. They taught me a dragon's obedience proved a king's strength. I believed enough of it to rule while others suffered beneath what I did not question. A noble lord whispered, "Your Majesty." Lucien's eyes cut to him. "Do not protect me from the truth now." That is how this began. The seer mark in Saraphene's palm glowed softly. Truth. Azerion lowered his scarred head. "What do you offer?" Lucien looked at the crown on the floor, then at Saraphene, not asking permission, not demanding absolution, only letting her witness the choice. "I offer the end of forced dragon bonds," he said. "Every existing bond will be brought before open witness. Any dragon may remain, leave refuge, or renegotiate without punishment. Any rider who tries to restore council compulsion will be tried as a chainmaker." The hall erupted in panic. Lucien's voice rose above it. "The Red Council is dissolved." Mean lunged to his feet. "You cannot dissolve the structure that holds the kingdom together." Lucien turned toward him. "Then the kingdom learns to stand without theft." Azerion's eyes burned brighter. But the ancient dragon did not bow. "Not yet. The king speaks law," Azerion said. "The seer must speak choice." Every gaze turned to Saraphene. Her throat tightened. This was the trap Melon had wanted from the beginning. Make the secret witch responsible for the fate of dragons and kings. If she spoke too strongly, they would say she commanded beasts. If she spoke too softly, they would rebuild the cage and call it caution. Saraphene stepped forward. "I will not rule dragons," she said. The words shocked the hall. Melon laughed, once broken and disbelieving. "Then what use is your blood?" Seraphim looked at him. "That question is why you lost," Azerion rumbled low. She lifted her marked palm. "My mother hid me so dragons would one day choose without being commanded by my blood, so I will not become the new chain just because the old one broke." The dragons outside shifted, listening. "I will witness, I will help open stolen memories, I will stand with those who choose truth. But no dragon belongs to me. No dragon belongs to the crown, no dragon belongs to the council." Azerion's wings opened behind the doorway, filling the hall with gold-lit shadow. Then the first seer's line remembers itself. Melon moved suddenly. He snatched a broken shard of red dragon glass from beneath his robe and drove it toward Saraphene's back. Lucien moved, but Azerion was faster. The ancient dragon's tail struck the floor between them, not killing Melon, only knocking the blade from his hand and throwing him to his knees before Saraphene. The shard skittered across the stone and stopped at her feet. Melon looked up, shaking with rage. "You will regret mercy." Saraphene bent and picked up the shard. For one breath, the whole court thought she might use it. She did not. She placed it on the floor before him. "No, you will live long enough to be witnessed." Azerion exhaled golden fire around Melon, not burning flesh, but sealing his hands in rings of light. God stepped forward this time by choice and took him. The dragons outside began to roar again, not in pain, in answer by dusk. The Red Council vaults were opened. Names were read aloud. Oral children, blinded dragons, riders whose bonds had been rewritten, servants sent to disappear inside the feeding pit. Some noble houses collapsed that night. Some riders lost dragons they had never deserved. Some dragons stayed, not because callers forced them, but because love had survived the law trying to corrupt it. Azerion did not return to the pit. He climbed to the highest tower of Draventhornne and watched the kingdom with restored eyes. Lucien did not sit on the dragon throne that night. He stood before it with the broken cuff and crown placed at his feet. Then he turned to Saraphene before the court. "Saraphene Orel," he said, voice rough. "My crown owes your mother truth. My reign owes your bloodline repair. And I owe you more than apology spoken after rescue." Saraphene looked at him carefully. "What do you think you owe me?" He held her gaze. "Time, witness, and the right to decide whether trust ever grows between us." The answer hurt in the gentlest way because it did not cage her. Outside, dragons circled beneath the first stars. The palace no longer sounded like a fortress holding its breath. It sounded wounded, uncertain, alive. Saraphene looked toward Azerion on the tower. The ancient dragon lowered his head not to command her to honor her. At dawn, Saraphene walked out through the opened gates beside Lucan, not behind him, not claimed by him. Beside him, with the seer mark glowing faintly in her palm and her mother's record held against her heart, the feeding pit below the eastern tower was unsealed. The bones inside were named, and for the first time in a century, when the dragons of Draventhornne opened their eyes, no chain told them where to book.